We are born of love. Love is our mother, Rumi. Welcome to the Guyana Dialogue. I'm your host, Shamiza Ali, and it is truly a pleasure being here with you this evening. Good evening to everyone joining us on Facebook and YouTube. Tonight, we will have a discussion on the private sector and investment opportunities, plus aspects of the Exxon contract. The Guyana Dialogue is being sponsored by a coordinating council of Guyanese based in the US, UK, Canada, Guyana, and the Caribbean. Funding support is by well known philanthropist Dave Narayan from Dave West Indian Imports. Please welcome my moderator for tonight, Dr. Tara Singh.
Thank you very much, Shamiza, and welcome to our
Welcome, Dr.
viewers.
Tara. Our panelists tonight are Dr. Ganga Ramdas and Professor Muniram Badu.
Hello.
Our guests tonight are financial analyst Mr. Joel Bagwandin and Chair of the Private Sector Commission of Guyana, Mr. Komal Singh. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here this evening. Dr. Tara.
Thank you very much, Shamiza, and welcome to our viewers. First, I want to thank the panelists, Professor Budu. He's an engineer by profession, a man with tremendous experience, traveled all over the world, written several books on engineering. And we also have Joel, our bright and talented rising star. He's well known now. His reputation precedes his age. And he knows no introduction. He's a very familiar face on this program. And we have Mr. Komal Singh, who is the chairman of the Private Sector Commission. Mr. Komal Singh is also one of Ghana's leading entrepreneurs, investors, etc. So we are very happy to have both of you gentlemen, especially representing the views of the private sector. Most of the time, we've been having the official view from government ministers, etc. But today, we have the opportunity to hear from the private sector point of view. Now, first of all, I'll ask Mr. Komal Singh to give us a little rundown on the role that he has as chairman of Private Sector Commission and how he envisage his work, his relationship with the central government. Or we just welcome Dr. Ganga Ramdas. Welcome, sir. Okay, Mr. Komal, can you please proceed?
Dr. Tara and everyone, thank you very much for having me on this program. Very excited to share my view as chairman of the Private Sector Commission and the role that the private sector is currently playing in the development of Guyana in keeping with the government strategic development plan for our country. The Private Sector Commission, as many of you know, is an umbrella body that represents all sectoral members around the country and corporate members. It's a combination of that. So I think we have a wide cross section of business organization that falls under the umbrella of the Private Sector Commission. Our role at the Private Sector Commission is very, very strategic. We worked on cross-cutting issues that affect businesses throughout the country. We work closely with government to make sure that doing business in Guyana is seamless. And wherever there's issues, we work with government to make sure that those issues are being resolved in an amicable manner so as to allow our business environment to thrive in keeping with the developmental plan for the respective companies, and at the same time in keeping with the developmental plan that government have for our country. We at the Private Sector Commission right now is very elated having the opportunity right now to work closely along with government and business organization to help develop Guyana at this point in time. We're at a strategic junction right now whereby government have given the private sector throughout the country an opportunity for us to grow and develop and for us to basically set the pace in where we want to go. And at the same time, the Private Sector Commission also has an opportunity at this point in time to participate in all the development that is taking place in the oil and gas sector that recently came on board. And I think it's a strategic time for all business organizations in Guyana and those who are not in business at this point in time to get on board. The opportunities are endless. It's enormous at this point in time. Outside of the oil and gas sector alone, the amount of opportunity that government is opening up right now in almost every single villages around the country, all right, whereby companies and individuals have an opportunity to participate and be part of the development. No longer individuals can sit on the side on the fence and say they're not getting an opportunity. We have seen the president enter almost every single villages in this country, giving every single person within communities who are saying that they don't have jobs, etc., an opportunity to be their own leaders, to be their own business person, and giving them different sorts of opportunity to become themselves, allow them to be their own business persons and create employment for themselves within those villages. So I think at this time, Guyana and Guyanese have an opportunity of a lifetime, and we as businesses should capitalize on that opportunity, find strategic partner in the diaspora around the world to make sure that we can participate in the development in a timely manner. Thank you.
Okay, let me just ask you a question. There are a few critics who say that certain groups of people are not given enough government contracts. You have any comment to make on that?
From a business perspective and from a personal business position, I would not get carried away with those naysayers. There is an opportunity here for every single Guyanese. There's a transparent tender process. We have been tendering on government projects for the last 30 years in this country. We have won some, we have lost some. Um, and I think every single Guyanese and every single business have an opportunity to do that. Right now, just think about it. Right now, we do not have enough contractors to do the amount of work that is in the government sector alone. We're short of contractors. So why would anyone wants to keep anybody at the bayside? All right. So I would say to everybody, ignore those naysayers. Just get on board, participate in the process. There is a transparent process. There is a transparent tender process. Let us all join into that tender process, all right, and try to get your job, put yourself together, put yourself into consortium, form consortium where you build capacity. So if you're tendering on a job, you're qualified for that job. A lot of the work that is taking place right now, some of us don't have enough capacity to do it. And the only way we can do that, we need to create partnership, create consortium. We have the old mentality sometimes that we need to stick to moms and pops operation. Our market is growing drastically. The level of work that is out there right now, is so much different from 5, 10 years ago. So forming consortium, it's a benefit and not a negative. So we should not look at one another as competitor. All right, we should look at one another as partner.
All right, thank you very much. Professor Boudou, you have any question or clarification from Mr. Komal Singh?
Well, what I want to do is to make a few brief statements relating to today's topic, to dialogue with both Mr. Komal Singh and Joel on this. In my assessment, there appears to be two camps in Guyana. One is sour, sorrowful, and destructive. Let's call them the bitter campers. In the other camp are busybodies in a hurry to transform the country. Let's call them the builders. Let's take, say, two investment sectors in Guyana, the natural resource sector, in particular the oil and gas, and the infrastructure sector. These are two very large sectors in Guyana. The bitter campers signed a lopsided oil contract, very favorable to the developers, with loose regulatory clauses, including environmental. Their constant drumbeating narratives are to pin the bad contract on the builders, the government. and to force the builders to renegotiate a fully executed agreement. Some in their camp are calling for the oil and gas to remain in the ground. For an impoverished country, this is stupidity. The crux of these narratives, and in fact, some of them are calling for environmental uh, problems. For example, they have a recurrent narrative that basically Guyana will be the environmental destroyer of the planet. The basic issue is that these recurrent narratives and stupidity is that the beta campers do not have their hands on the oil money. They and some others think that Guyana is going to be awash with oil money, when in fact the total estimated amount is relatively small when one considers the kind of infrastructure needs that the country has. Of course, if you view the oil money as personal money or inheritance, then it's a lot, and you're going to be bitter if some others are in control of that money. Now, on the other hand, the builders, the current government, is busy trying to accomplish what the party's manifesto promised the people and keep adding other promises. They are in a hurry, and this hurriedness can lead to significant problems. The many infrastructure projects are being built without the needed manpower. Mr. Komal Singh just mentioned that there's a deficit of 30% in manpower. There's the absence of building codes, state of the art standards, and in some cases, poor absent project management. I've written about these in the newspapers. The results are that some projects may be overpriced, some may have short lifespan, and some may actually fail. While this is speculative because some of these projects are still ongoing and getting the details on these projects are very difficult, the auditor's reports and the major reporting show that there are beginnings of the results of some of these issues. Some newly reconstructed roads already have potholes and large cracks. Some contractors are paid in to start a project but never start it. Some contractors and the staff do not have the experience to do the required work. And Mr. Komal Singh just mentioned that they can't find contractors. Now, my question to both of you is Is my assessment naive, misconstrued, or correct? I'm on the money. I would like to get your response, but please provide facts in your response. And let's start with Joel, and then we'll move to Komal.
All right. Good evening. Good evening, all. Good evening to. Hello.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Good evening, all. Good evening to your viewers. And thank you, Dr. Tara Singh, for the kind introduction earlier, the very generous introduction earlier. I'm humbled. In response to your question, Professor Budu, I'll be very brief to say that your assessment is pretty much an accurate reflection of the realities. Of course, yes, the government means well. The government has a mandate given to it by the people. It has to deliver to the people. And there are a number of inherent challenges, as you have correctly pointed out. From the perspective of the government, I can understand that what do we do? Government are oftentimes in a position where they have to make difficult decisions. And the difficult decision is, on one hand, these are the limitations. We have a skills deficit, we have a capacity problem. On the other hand, we have we need to develop our country, we need to create opportunities for people. And if we have new contractors emerging, new entrepreneurs emerging, we need to also build them. So that comes at a cost. And the cost, unfortunately, is you are going to have some of these weaknesses, as you have pointed out. That is not to say, however, that we must not improve, but as Komal, the chairman of the Private Sector Commission, alluded to, parallel to that, we need to invest the resources, deploy the resources, and work with our counterparts to improve on the capacity, improve on the quality of work that we're delivering. I could recall, the vice president on several occasions when he engages with the public. He has These are not challenges that he has not acknowledged, and by extension, the government. But what he has also indicated, like for example, the one with the roads, right? There are thousands of projects being undertaken across the country, thousands of construction roads, miles of roads being built across the country. It's difficult for the government at the ministerial level, at the executive level, and even at the technical level to monitor all of these projects. And so they are encouraging the population, they're encouraging the general public. If you see something, you see substandard work, bring it to the attention. We are in an era, an information age. We have so many mediums of never a time has there been, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we've never had this type of technology and connectivity where you can access a minister of government, or even at the highest level, at the president, the executive level. And when things are posted on social media, it gets the attention of the policymakers, of the relevant authorities, and they do act on it. So so to conclude my response to that question, yes, your assessment is correct, from where I sit, and those limitations are not to be discounted. We need to make, as a country, as a government, as a people, as a private sector, and all the other stakeholders contribute. We have a role to play in improving, in addressing those limitations.
Are he there?
Komal?
No, sorry.
Hello?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
All right. My I actually lost you for a moment, but my comment to Joel's position here also is that we have an opportunity right now, like Joel alluded to meet so easily. So issues can be addressed on a timely manner. We have seen government and the private sector entered communities that have issues and resolve those issues within a short span of time. And in some cases, you see some of those issues are resolved timely. Um, like I said earlier, we cannot work with the naysayers. If you look around our country right now, you will see in almost single villages and all walks of life, people are getting involved in projects in the construction sector in a big way. Our construction industry is booming. And I can safely say here right now, if you look around Guyana, it's so difficult to find carpenters and laborers around the place. Only yesterday we went into to a community right in Georgetown, and we've participated. We've seen those guys, as a result of government initiative, start building blocks within their communities. And these are guys who were not getting jobs before or weren't being employed before. Now they're doing their own business. So the sector is growing and the people need to grow with the sector. And I agree with Joel. We need to go out and seek out and join hands together and grow ourselves so that we can participate in the transpiring taking place in our country at this point in time.
Yeah. Dr. Ganga, your comment.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Tara, for this opportunity.
Mhm.
Uh, our listeners, thank you for being there. I'd like start by outlining four main pillars of economic development, then ask Mr. Komal Singh what are the action points and the empowerment initiatives that the private sector is performing to fulfill its role. The four legs which he touched on, labor and labor relations, that's very, very important. The second one is where we have an abundance of resources, and that is land. How do we mobilize land to our advantage? We have been brought to this point in time in Guyana through different land development schemes. Uh, that model worked for us successfully. You can't have development without land. The sugar plantations, they have demonstrated that. We are now experimenting with other large scale agriculture, but we need a broad based approach so that we can mobilize more people and bring them on board to do these various things. Dr. Boudou mentioned infrastructure. Infrastructure itself has a role in development, and that role is to lower everybody's cost, the movement of goods and people. The costs for moving each unit must go down. If we just build roads for its own sake, maybe to alleviate congestion, that's a good point. But the ultimate development thrust should be to lower costs for moving goods and people. And this is where you find, let's take a small island economy like Trinidad. Everything is at hand reach, everything is nearby. So those costs of moving goods and people are lower. If we go with private transportation, the cost goes up. With public transportation, it goes down. So we have a choice to make there. Then the third leg is choice of technology. In the case of India, their development thrust was through screening of private investments and directing the incentives to move in those directions. Then the fourth leg would be capital, development capital. We need a fund accessible by the private sector in order to bring more people on board. So, labor, land, technology, and capital are the main drivers. So, if you can pick, let's take the abundant factor, land. What actions are being undertaken by the private sector? And secondly, what type of empowerment is being implemented to direct the development initiative?
Oh, thank you, Dr. Ganesh. Um, you touched on a very critical, very important point here as it relates to abundance of land. And you're right. Guyana have an abundance of land, and not just abundance of land, but very fertile land, which were not developed over the last couple of years. And the lack of development, especially from the agriculture side, is basically arise as a result of not having adequate market. So that we have seen outside of the sugar industry and the rice industry, a lot of people have moved away from the farm because of marketing. What we have seen recently, we have seen the development of large scale farming, especially on the soya side. Within a year, you've seen that aspect of the agriculture sector develop significantly with the focus of the government right now on agriculture, trying to make Guyana the breadbasket of the Caribbean. Guyana and Guyanese have an opportunity right now to develop those land that was not developed over the years and create more value added products so that we can support the region in a very large way, and not just ourselves. What we need to do, however, it comes back to capital and access to capital and how much capital or local people have to develop those, to make sure that we do it in a way where we have economies of scale. We can mechanize the operations so you can compete on the international market when it comes to pricing. One of our problems is our cost of production is so high. And because of that, you can do value added product. And that's why Trinidad is ahead of us. But with the development of the gas to energy project, all right, whereby we will see a reduction on our power costs from 26 to maybe 10 cents, all right, per kilowatt hour, that's going to reduce cost of production in a very big way. That will allow more people to go back to the farm. It will allow more people to invest in value-added products, especially in the agro-processing sector. And I think that's a good initiative that we've seen from government, pushing to get that GT project out of the way as quickly as possible. And it will have a rippling effect with farmers and the entire abundance of land that we have around the place. We will see more investor. And I just mentioned capital. If we don't create this before, in the agri sector, in land development, we will have to rewind the wheel. We will have to go and take all the risk. So creating those partnerships who have the expertise and who have the capital to invest will assist our people and Guyana at large to develop those land within a short span of time, and at the same time develop it in such a way where we can have economies of scale, we can mechanize those operations, thus creating better value added product at a competitive price so we can compete on the international market for our products.
What about the land development schemes, the housing project, the massive housing project that's being undertaken by the government and private sector as well?
Look, we have seen massive housing drives taking place right now. Government have committed to construct thousands of homes. If you go right across the length and breadth of Guyana, you see massive housing development taking place, which is a good thing. That is also allowing our people to empower them, for them to own their own home, for them to be able to go home and plant a little kitchen garden, go back to the garden. They're no longer living in a renting house. Um, that program is on a massive drive right, and I can safely say, based on what we're seeing from the private sector side, the private sector have jumped on board with the government to take up land and build homes alongside with government so that government can achieve that objective within a short span of time.
Mhm. Thank you. All right.
I'd like
Joe,
to add one comment.
go ahead.
What given that Guyana is spread out so much, the idea of regional export processing zones should really help to lower the costs for businesses all across the country. So that had worked in some parts of Guyana. We need to look at that model. They're doing that in Malaysia. They're taking in land from different neighboring the seashore side, especially, and they're converting it into export processing zones. That can help to lower infrastructure costs for the individual businesses.
Mm.
Good point.
Okay. Um, all right. We have several other areas which we want to cover. Joel, I know this has been in the public domain for the past 2 weeks. The insurance matter with the EPA and the ruling of the judge. Can you give us an update on that? And because there has been so much conflicting views about this.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Dr. Tara,
Yeah, proceed.
for that important. Now that has been, and during the course of the week, you may have observed that I would have written extensively on this subject following the court ruling, the High Court ruling on the matter. Now, for the viewers' benefit, I would like to give some quick background on the issue, and that is it has been a long-standing contentious issue
largely propagated by a group of lobbyists, advocates. I'm not sure how to describe them, but a small group of people. Um, and that long-standing advocacy has ended up in a court, becoming a court case. And then the we've had the ruling, and the ruling was in favor of those persons. Now, while I'm not an attorney, I'm not giving a legal perspective on the ruling, but there are some financial ramifications, which is more within my space. And so my perspective is based on the financial aspect of it. Uh, so the environmental permit, if one looks at the language in the environmental permit, I think the language is very clear, very explicit, and there was no dispute in the first place in terms of what are the risks associated with offshore oil and gas operations. There are no dispute with that. There is no denial of that in terms of the the liabilities that could occur, the damages that could manifest as a result of any emergency. And so the government, from the government's perspective and everyone's perspective, it's the oil companies ought to take the responsibility for the full liability, the full cost in the event of any future adverse event that may occur. Specifically, for simplicity of the discussion, an oil spill, right? Now, the issue has been to what extent of the legal coverage we should have. And there was this big argument for the past 2, 3 years that at one point it was unlimited insurance coverage. Then the other point, they were conflating some concepts. Some concepts were conflated and confused. Unlimited insurance and unlimited parent company guarantee in a whole, and that ended up in the court argument. Now, unfortunately and respectfully, the judge ruled that, and he relied on the environmental permit, the conditions in the permit, condition 14 of the permit. And based on his interpretation, he has interpreted that it requires the oil companies, the subsidiary EEPGL and its co-ventures, to have an unlimited or uncapped parent company guarantee. And in my writings that I've done over the week, I would have examined in an academic way. In an academic way, this is the language of the period of condition 14 that the judge relied on, and of specific emphasis or specific note is that condition 1410 used the term adequate financial resources. Now we have two professors, three professors, one medical and two other professors on this call, and Dr. Ramdas, who has far more pedigree than me in this in this uh, in this field. Um, Adequate and unlimited has very different meaning. So, and then in the financial reporting side of it, right? Ultimately, having a provision or having a coverage, insurance coverage, a parent company guarantee, it is effectively what you call in finance a contingent liability, meaning catering for some future event, that for some future expense or liability triggered by some event. In this case, the oil spill. So that is the thrust of the case. That is the thrust of the argument. And the government's position, and when you look at the conditions and the terms of it, on one, there are three layers of recourse in the event there is a spill. There is the insurance coverage, which is to the tune of 600 million, which is carried by the local subsidiary. Then there is the assets of the local subsidiaries. And then thirdly, there is the parent company guarantee, which, according to reports from the government, that they have recently come to reached an agreement with ExxonMobil in terms of what the parent company guarantee should be. Now, today, as we speak, the vice president had his press conference, and the EPA issued a statement offering further clarifications as to the basis of their appeal and how they arrived at this parent company guarantee. The argument on one side is that a parent company guarantee should not have any limit, but there are many things. It's not a simple issue, right? Because on one hand, you have financial reporting requirements, and US ExxonMobil is a US multinational company, and contingent liabilities, parent company guarantees is governed by financial reporting standards. In the case of the US, it's governed by a financial reporting standard referred to as GAAP, General Accounting, um, the GAAP reporting standard. So when one examines that standard, it specifies how guarantees have to be reported. It specifies the different levels of risk, high probability, medium probability, low probability. It specifies what has to be reported as a note in the based on how the risk is assessed, and it specifies what does not have to be reported. So what that suggests is the entire process in determining this guarantee, it is a risk assessment. And this is what other the opponents or people of this unlimited view, they are not considering that it is not that Exxon will run from their responsibility. It is that there is a process and it is a risk assessment exercise that has to determine the guarantee. And then the law that EPA is governed by, and they cited today in their statement, the act of itself specifies that the guarantee has to be determined by way of an estimate. So it means that a risk assessment has to be conducted. And in assessing the risk of something like this, a contingent liability in particular, it's a very subjective exercise. So you can argue forever on what the number should be. So, for context, what would, and incidentally, when I read the EPA statement today, I had no prior knowledge that during this process in finalizing the parent company guarantee, is that Exxon was required to provide them with an estimate, which would have informed their decision, their technical work, and what this parent company guarantee should be, right? To quantify that or to come up with that estimate. And the estimate that Exxon provided was between 1.5 billion to $2 billion. Now you could come up with hundreds of scenarios and hundreds of estimates based on the assumption, but the estimate is not only driven by assumptions. You have to consider the risk, the risk management systems in place, the safety standards that they have in place, and safety procedures and so forth. And those persons who were pushing this argument, let's call the proponents of the unlimited view, they have often relied to a large extent on the BP Gulf of Mexico oil spill, which is regarded as the largest, most catastrophic uh, oil spill in the petroleum industry's history. And there are several numbers, there are several costs out there by different groups or different organizations. One recent study that I read who take into consideration the hidden cost The study was called "What is the ultimate cost of the BP spill?" And they came up with 142 billion US dollars 10 years later, right? So that BP oil spill case study, which was an unfortunate event in the Gulf of Mexico, is used as the benchmark to substantiate this argument. Oh, a spill could be so catastrophic, we won't have any money and all these sort of things. But that is not the only basis on how you determine the estimate. Because in fairness to Exxon, and I've read the BP case, I've read several studies on the BP case study, and since 4 years ago, and what I found in some of my readings is that prior to the explosion, BP had issues with their safety standard. There was a historic trend of inconsistencies with their safety standard. And of course, BP and Exxon, they have different levels of safety standard. In the last 3 decades, compare BP to ExxonMobil in terms of what major event that Exxon was involved in. They were involved in the Exxon Valdez oil spill, which occurred in 1989. That's over 30 years ago. And the Exxon Valdez oil spill was caused not by an explosion on the rig or a blowout of the well, as in the case of BP. The Valdez spill was caused by their tanker, and Komal would know these terminologies better than me, where the oil tanker ran aground. And so the tanker was destabilized, which resulted in the spill. And that spill was over in excess of 200,000 barrels of oil equivalent versus the BP, which, according to a federal court's ruling, was 3.19 million barrels because it took 3 months before they could have capped the well. Now, what has happened 3 decades? What are the developments in the industry 3 decades later? Oh, by the way, the Valdez cost was 4.3 billion US back then. Adjusting that for inflation in today's money, it's about 9.8 billion US. So that's a fraction of the BP oil spill cost in the Gulf of Mexico, which was only 10 years ago. Now, fast forward to today. What I'm doing here, I'm going through for the viewers to understand essentially a risk assessment exercise, because I've done this and I came up with an estimate without prior knowledge of the Exxon estimate, almost exactly with the Exxon estimate. So I'm explaining the process of the risk assessment methodology. So Exxon in Guyana now, following the Valdez spill, they would have improved their safety standards globally. And Komal will tell you, who is heavily invested in the oil and gas industry and has far more practical knowledge in the industry. And I'm sure Mr. Budu, as an engineer, as a renowned engineer, would know more than me that the petroleum industry globally it is perhaps the highest industry in terms of safety standards. And technology, it's driven by technology, and technology is developing, so it is so dynamic in the development of technology that are used in the industry for safety standard requirements. So there is something called the capping stack, which is the capping stack is a device used to cap a well in the event of a blowout or an emergency. Now, prior to the 2010 BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, this device, which is called a capping stack, never existed. So it was developed following the 2010 uh, explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, in our permit, there is a requirement for the oil company to have at least one capping stack in country, so that in the event there is an emergency, it could be quickly deployed, right? They're also required to have a subscription with a manufacturer of the device. So if you need to procure additional capping stack in an emergency, depending on the magnitude or whatever the situation is, they could quickly deploy it. Now, considering those variables, right? The Gulf of Mexico last year took 90 days, let's say 90 days, 3 months, 90 days to, to cap the well. We now have a capping stock. And in our permit, they're required in the event of an emergency to cap the well within 9 days. So we can now simply take, we know the cost for the BP spill. If we want to ascertain for the sake of discussion or for the sake of having a perspective or an idea, we can take the cost for the cleanup cost for a spill of the BP, and we can apply, work out what is the cost for a spill, and we could make some assumptions for inflation, for example, right? It's only 10 years ago. There are several costs, environmental costs, and so on. Now, in our case, our environmental cost would not be as substantial as the Gulf of Mexico if you could deploy a capping stock within 9 days to cap the well. And I ran some numbers and based on some assumptions. If you have a spill and you cap the well within 9 days, then the oil spill, the magnitude of it would be about 315,000 barrels. It worked out to about 35,000 barrels per day using the BP spill scenario as a worst case, right? And using the cost per day for this cleanup and multiplying that cost per day, finding the cost per day using the BP as the benchmark, and use a 9-day scenario because of the capping stack device, I came up with exactly the Exxon estimate, which I had no knowledge of. I came up with 2.7 billion. Now the 2.7 billion include, I did some assumptions for the environmental cost, considering the fishing industry, for example, the export earnings from the fishing industry, which would be damaged. And so there is some assumptions in there for that, some calculations in there for that. The cleanup cost alone is 1.4 billion. Based on that assumption, Exxon provided 1.5 to 2 billion. The point is, we could have 100 estimates and 100 different numbers. The point is to comply with the reporting requirements, gap reporting requirements. Two, to comply with the Environmental Act. The environmental permit is guided by the Act. You have to come up with an estimate, but that does not mean if you don't have enough coverage from the parent company guarantee and in reality something happens, it's not going to be covered. So putting that same example for demonstration purposes, we have the $600 million insurance. We have Exxon's total assets, the local subsidiaries, the consolidated assets as of 2021 was 9 billion US, right? Now, the growth of the asset, they haven't filed their 2022 financials as yet, right? So that's going to be filed sometime, perhaps probably in June or so on. So assuming that the year over year growth is the same in 2022 from 2021 relative to 2020, which is 57%, we can safely assume that using that assumption, the total assets of the consolidated assets have grown by 57% to reach 14 billion US dollars. So you have 14 billion dollars plus the 2 billion guarantee plus the 600 million insurance. That's 16.6 billion dollars in coverage in assets and insurance guarantee, parent company guarantee and insurance. Now, if we have a spill that cost, the liability is say 2 or 3 billion dollars, that's about 16% of the total assets. So what the permit, the condition in the permit prescribe is for there to be adequate financial resources to cover a spill. And $16 billion is more than adequate for a $3 billion scenario. Of course, if a worst case scenario is greater, remember the total assets is growing every year. The assets is not stagnant at 14 billion. Every year the asset is growing. We're increasing production every year. So the gross revenue is growing every year. And so your asset is growing every year. The risk, of course, if you're having multiple FPSOs would be greater, of course, relatively, right? So that is the whole
Yeah,
argument and the whole confusion.
yeah.
So it's not
Our
that you can't have
Well, I think that explanation is excellent, and but let me get Mr. Komal Singh to come in here. He's a man very knowledgeable in the oil industry, and he himself has been building a big wharf, a facility at Nimes on the west bank of Damara. Singh.
All right, thank you. Just to make one comment off of Joel's stuff. The Valdez spill um, was done as a result, like he said, of a vessel uh, that got punctured and there was a spill. What happened in those years? They had single hull vessels. It therefore means if the vessel gets a hole, then everything's out into the water. What you have right now is any oil tanker that is moving around the world, it must be a double hull tanker. So that gives you the added protection. If there is a puncture in the outer layer, it's not going to affect. So the risk reduced significantly using double. Now, Exxon is the least of our issue in my view when it comes to oil. We need to have to make sure that all vessels in our port, for example, and moving fuel around the country or bringing fuel in our all vessel. So that's something I know
Mhm.
uh, agencies are currently working to make sure that they move to double hull vessel rather than single hull vessel. Well, coming back to uh, Dr. Singh, it relates to um, development in the oil and gas sector. Exxon has been doing quite a bit, and as a result of the oil and gas um, development, we have seen tremendous amount of development to support. Um, so much so at this point in time, we're barely scraping to support the sector. The infrastructure development needs to be put in place right now. It's still a work in progress. We currently have two shoreways right now that is supporting the system, but two shoreways is still not adequate. We have a third one at Vichy over at Region 3 going up, which, when completed, will support and create a whole host of opportunities both for Guyanese and for the sector in a bigger way. We've also seen the massive development on the gas to energy project. The gas project is going to bring in gas from the rig onto land into a power plant and allow us into the grid to have lower cost of energy. Now, to reach to that stage, again, it's a whole host of development. There need to be a 26 km pipeline installation inland. There need to be installation of pipeline from land out to the rig. The development into a wharf facility that requires construction for the company down at the back of Wales. When the wharf is completed, that wharf will also be supporting all the development that will be on the power plant over the next couple of years. So we can safely say at this point in time, oil and gas have brought tremendous amount of opportunity for our market and for our people, and we need to capitalize on it. As it relates to, and I step back a point to unlimited parent company guarantee. Look, we have done parent company guarantee, and there's not like an unlimited parent company guarantee. You cannot guarantee something more than the worth of a company. And for that reason, Joel is right in his analysis that there need to be systematic way of reviewing and coming up with a fair amount of value before you can actually arrive at a number to have a parent company guarantee. The asset value of that organization is growing daily. We have seen over the last couple of years they're adding an FPSO almost every year. Every time an FPSO is added, it's additional value that to that local. So, from my perspective, private sector perspective, I think we're pretty much in good hands. A company of that magnitude is not going to do nothing. And I've spent 16 years in the oil and gas industry working with Chevron and Texaco, and I can tell you the amount of money that is being spent annually to make sure that things are done. And then when it comes to upstream, it's even worse. those companies invest a lot more money to make sure that anything they do is extremely safe. And that is why Joel mentioned, as a result of the BT spill, the cap in stock came into effect. All right. And the cap in stock is a very expensive piece of kit that they have stored around the world. Right. Those are additional measures and measures that is put in to make sure that in the event there is a spill, in the event there is a spill, right, it's not going to be one that's going to be exposed to the environment for a long period of time. So from my perspective, I think we're in pretty good hands where that is concerned. We have seen a lot of measures being taken daily, even on project sites. If you work with some of the projects around with that company, your least spill that you have around the place, it needs to be reported. They're so cognizant of every little bit of drop of oil that falls on the ground, and that tells you the level of interest that is being paid when it comes to oil. One that thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. You raised a very interesting point here just now, though, at the beginning. What happened to these oil tankers when they come into our shore and they get oil spill? Has anybody addressed that, or the only concern with Exxon oil spill, or what?
Well, that's why I said to you. So for me, Exxon is least of our problem when it comes to oil spill because of the amount of effort and measures that they have. Most of these international vessels that enters our water right now, that bring fuel in, there are alcohol vessels, and they go to the US water, alcohol vessels. But
All right, Professor Boudou, your comments?
Well, there's a couple of comments. First one is I don't know where Exxon is going to find an insurance company that's going to give them unlimited liability. I mean, just look at your car insurance and you will see what it has, right? So there's no company in the world will do that, right? And most of these companies like Exxon would also have an umbrella insurance, right? So that's another big pot of money that is available for such an oil spill. The other comment I want to make is this question about Guyana having a lot of lands. No, we hear a lot of things like that. Guyana got a lot of lands, they have a lot of resources. But what is important here is not a lot of land. It is what is important is government policies for land development and land management, right? And in Guyana, where we do a lot of this agricultural work, drainage and irrigation is a big, big issue. So we have to have good planning where we plant what water is available, where you're going to have these storage, and where you're going to have all of these drainage. Remember, we're still below sea level. We have a major flood issue. So we have to look at those issues, and we don't think that because we have land, we can grow, or fertile land for that matter, grow and do a lot of stuff. We have to have good policies and good land management.
Mr. Komal, you want to react to that?
yes, I want to just make a quick comment to that. We have, let's take the Hope Canal for example. The Hope Canal, if the Hope Canal was not there, we would have seen a 2005 situation back many times after. The Hope Canal have created a situation where excess the conservancy can be drained straight to the Atlantic and have that water management in place. I am aware that governments are at this point in time looking at having a few more hope canals around Region 4, Region 5, um, to help mitigate any major flooding and to open up more lands where farming can take place without having to worry that their farm land will be underwater like what we past. We do have a problem right now. I mean, there's no questions around. Still have flooding around, but that it's very hard to know if the government is looking at it, it's more hope canal because we have seen how effective canal was over the couple of years because we still weren't underwater. So the 2005 flood, we didn't have 6 inches of rainfall within that short span of time. All right. So water management, like you rightly said, it is critical. It is very important for us to develop those land that we have around. Thank you.
Dr. Ganga, your final comment, please.
Yes. the way I look at it, Article 20 in the 2016 PSA needs a written statement or a written guarantee by the parent company to implement those provisions. They, as it stands, it's more like an assurance rather than actual substance, and that assurance can be implemented along the lines that Joel mentioned, but we're not there yet. We don't have an actual spill. In ordinary insurance, you have an insurance adjuster. With a major oil spill, you will have to get cost estimators external to the industry, preferably, rather than the company themselves. So we need to make provisions for these situations in a substantive, in a material way. So even if you set the insurance at $1 and it's backed by the parent company and by the principals, that would uphold itself. But we can't just leave a gap there and leave it to the discretion of the companies. We need something in writing, and I believe that's what Judge Kisoon was uh, pointing towards. Insurance works with written agreements. They don't work by themselves. They need adjusters and they need cost estimators, and those would have to be acceptable to the both parties. Currently, I have a case like that, and I had to renegotiate the amount of settlement. And there are different ways and approaches you can do that. So something in writing has to be given to Guyana. They can't just be at the discretion of the companies. And furthermore, Joel mentioned contingent liability. The EPA cannot place a contingent liability on the balance sheet of an American company. Separate document that would outline what would happen should there be a major oil spill, and also you can we can look forward to hiring Joel as a cost estimator if that contingent situation materializes.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you, sir. We run out of time, and we ask Mr. Komal Singh to make your closing remarks. This is just an hour program, so we are running a bit late. So if you can please make your
Thank,
closing. I
thank
will.
you.
Uh, Go
Uh, uh,
ahead.
from on behalf of the private sector, we're very very happy to be part of the program. We're very happy as a private sector commission to be given an opportunity in our country development point in time to work closely with government and to help develop Guyana in a way where we can all have a better life in Guyana and we can see Guyana develop within a shorter span of time and we can all enjoy the benefits of the oil and gas industry. So our children going forward can live a better life. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Joel, your final comments.
Thank you. I'll use the opportunity here to make a few quick comments on Dr. Ganga, who is correct, by the way. And what happened in this court matter is that the judge did not have the benefit to examine the parent company guarantee because when the matter was being uh, the proceedings were ongoing in the court. The parent company guarantee was still in negotiations. Even up at this point, while the agreement is reached, the written document is not in place as yet because now EEPGL has to go and get the co-ventures to sign on and then issue that written document.
Mm,
And then that written document of itself, in the form of the parent guarantee, its will have its own terms and conditions as well, in keeping with the conditions in the permit. So just wanted to mention that for the viewers' benefit. So with that, thank you for having me on the program. It's always good sharing this platform very esteemed, academics, educators here. So, I'm a student
Mhm.
too. To everyone here. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Komal Singh. I hand you back now to our host, Ms. Shamiza. I don't know if you have any questions or what.
Thank you, Dr. Tara. We don't have any questions, but we do want to acknowledge a few of our guests. Uh, Kef Samaru from Canada. We also have Ramona Kareem and several others who has been very faithful to us here at the Guyana Dialogue. Tonight we are celebrating 1 year of the Guyana Dialogue, and so we would like to thank,
Um,
all of our panelists, our moderator, Dr. Tara, all of our guests. We're grateful to all our supporters, our guests, which included our president, vice president, prime minister, and several ministers within the government. Um, we also would like to thank our sponsor, Dave Westinian
yeah.
Imports, for his contribution over the last year.
And
Thank you,
our,
everyone.
and
Until
our
next time.
we would like to thank our technical Asif Ali behind the scenes. He has been putting together these programs, and of course, yourself being the host. We have to get Mr. Komal Singh and JC another time on this program to continue our conversation. It was very, very nice hearing from the Private Sector Commission and how you feel, and this type of analysis that you did, JC. You don't get it in the papers. What people write is a whole set of impressions and no kind of, I don't want to put in, people have a right to express their opinion, but opinions that are not based on evidence or facts, you can't really take them seriously. And that's my point. And that is where you come in and other analysts. I know we have Mr. Komal Singh is an established, recognized businessman, entrepreneur who has years of experience in this, has done extremely well. And next time we can ask him about his own venture, the names. That's I'm very much interested in that project.
Good,
Uh,
good.
All right. Well, thank you to our entire panelists, guests tonight. Until next time, I am Shamiza Ali, and this is the Guyana Dialogue. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you.